Do you believe that the Torah was written by God?
Yes.
Why do you believe that?
There's many avenues people go down, but the one that I found most compelling was an argument that I remember reading when I was 16 years old. And for me, I was like, yeah, that's pretty convincing. Um, I would just preface what I'm about to say uh, with the point that I don't think Judaism believes in this concept of blind faith and that we should believe in principles without good reason. God gave us intellectual faculties, the ability to reason, and it doesn't really seem right that he would say, right, dismiss that when it comes to the most fundamental aspect of understanding your reason for being here. So Judaism is actually about the work of getting to know God, knowledge of God. The first of the Ten Commandments is to know there is a God. And that's really what all of Torah is really meant to be about, getting to know our creator and build a partnership with him. It's not about blind faith. And so therefore the question is, well, then what is faith in Judaism? If it's knowledge, then what's the word faith? So the word emunah is really better which is translated as faith in from Hebrew into English, is better translated as faithfulness, which means being loyal. Instead of faith without having something, believing in something without evidence, instead faithful, being loyal to what you know to be true. And people might think, well, obviously I'm going to be loyal to what I believe is true. Well, it's not necessarily true. You can know that smoking's bad for you and be tempted daily to want to smoke. You can know that you want to lose weight, but be tempted every day by that brownie. So the work of Eminat is, okay, you can develop that knowledge, but then the question is, are you going to be loyal to that truth? Anyway, the argument that I read, and people, as I say, go down many routes. They can go down a philosophical route, they can go down a logical route, they can go down the scientific route. But for me, a quick analysis of Jewish history and the fact that it's clearly foretold in the Torah is for me, a massive, like, fundamental basis of why I believe the Torah is divine. And the argument goes, and it's referred to as the seven wonders of Jewish history. I summarized them in a video I did on JTV called Compelling Evidence for God, Jewish History. Basically looks at the fact that the Jews have been few in number throughout all their history, 15 million, right? They were similar in size to the Han Dynasty of China thousands of years ago, whereas today the population of China is 1.3 billion, give or take 15 million. Whereas 50 million is the number of Jews there are in the world today. We have less Jews today than we did before the Holocaust. We're just about making up those numbers. We've always been tiny. And then number two, we've been scattered all over the world throughout most of our history. I don't know any other nation that's had such a fate. When I talk to schools about this, and Jewish schools or Jewish societies, I say, tell me one country where one of your grandparents are from. In fact, I did that just today in a school. And we did a world tour within 5 minutes. So Jews have been scattered all over the world, despite every other nation having a common land, language, and culture. We've been intensely persecuted.
So let me just keep track. The first one is that the Jews have been a tiny population. What was the second one?
Few in number.
Well,
then the second one is world dispersion, worldwide exile throughout most of our history. That's starting to change now.
Okay.
Then the third one is intense persecution.
Okay.
So anti-Semitism is unique for four key reasons. It's longevity. Jews have been hated for as long as they've been around. It's universality seems to crop up wherever Jews go or don't go. Its intensity. Think of the long list of words used to describe anti-Semitism: blood libel, Holocaust, ghetto, pogrom, Inquisition, etc., etc. And then also its irrationality. We hate Jews because they're rich, because they're poor, because they're capitalists, because they're communists, because they created their own state, because they're parasites on our state, blah, blah, blah. Usually with other hatreds, there's a consistent theme that comes up, but with Jews, it's not just different, it's often contradictory. So you've got that intense persecution, annihilationist persecution, which is pretty unmatched in history. So all those things together, sociologists will tell you, will be a surefire way to destroy people. But we haven't been destroyed. The fourth thing is that the Jewish people have survived. Great nations and empires have risen and fallen, and yet the Jew remains. And it's not just like we're small relic of an ancient people. No, we're still practicing, living the values and culture and customs and beliefs and laws of Moses. So there's this eternity of the Jewish people, and ancient peoples have come and gone. The Jebusites, Hittites, and as I say, ancient empires. You go to Rome today, there's nothing living, breathing of ancient Rome that's still there. It's all just ancient history. So you've got this eternity of the Jewish people, and then you've got the fact that the Jewish people not just have survived despite all the odds, despite being few in number, scattered, intensely persecuted, but they've had this remarkable impact on the world. Forget individual Jews who have dramatically changed the world. Think just in the century, the 20th century, Einstein, Freud, Marx, although I wouldn't necessarily say that was a positive contribution, but nevertheless, it had a big impact. But certainly, Jews throughout the centuries, 20% of Nobel Prize winners. But let's just think more importantly about Jewish values, how the revolutionary idea of one God who desires personal relationship with humanity. Abraham introduced that idea to the world. He was laughed at. He was known as a Hebrew, which meant separate. And 2,000 years later, the majority of the world worships the God of Abraham. Clearly foretold, God says, you'll be a light to the nations, and all the families of the earth will bless themselves through you, Abraham. So you've got this remarkable story of Jews having their hands tied behind their backs, as Mark Twain said, and not only surviving, but changing the world in the process. And also this remarkable relationship with the land of Israel, where the land was prospering 2,000 years ago. They lived there. We have archaeological evidence for that. They were scattered. For 2,000 years, it remained by and large desolate. And then they returned there. Now, and again, that's an unprecedented story. But the point is, I would accept that if these things weren't prophesied and foretold, then I would say it's an amazing story, and that's the end of the matter. But the fact is, it's not just an amazing story, unprecedented, but it's explicitly foretold. The Torah, God says in the Torah, I'll scatter you among the nations, you'll be few in number. Every one of those 7 things, that you'll be dispersed, the land will be desolate, I'll return you at the end of days. So my question is, what's more plausible, that it was written by human beings who had no precedent for these things occurring? And we know the Torah text is 2,000 years old at least because of ancient copies that we have access to. So the question is simply, was it written by human beings? How could they know? If they got one thing wrong, well, then the whole thing would be redundant. Or is it written by a being who is not bound by time, that knows the future and is who the author claims to be?
Let me just make sure I understand the argument. So the first point is that, So I think you've made five points, and I'm writing this down. I think I got some of this wrong, so I'm hoping you can correct me. So here's what I have. I have 5 points. The first point is that the Jews have always been a tiny population. Is that correct? More or less? Okay. Second point is that there was a worldwide exile. And oh, actually, no, sorry. So each of these 5 points you're saying were prophesized or predicted or written in the Torah, right? Okay. So first one, Jews have always been small. The second one is there's been a worldwide exile. I'm simplifying. The third one is persecution. I'm simplifying again. The fourth one is about the remarkable impact on the world. Of course, I'm simplifying. And the fifth one is the return to Israel. So all 5 were foretold in the Torah. Am I correct directionally? Is there a 6 or 7? Did I catch everything?
Almost. It's okay. 7. So there's few. Yeah, number 1 is few in number. 2 is scattered all over the world.
Yep.
3 is intensely persecuted. 4 is survived. Right, we're still here. And 5 is the impact on the world's values. 6 is being in the land and then being dispersed throughout most of history, and the land being desolate. So it was fertile and then it was desolate. And then the 7th one is the return and the land responding to her people.
Okay. One of them to me seemed a little like I counted 6, but 6, 7. I think we're on the same page. It's compelling, right? Because each of these things, the Torah makes these remarkable, you can say, predictions. And I think I guess I want to ask questions. Can I ask you questions about this? guess that's
Cool.
why we're here, right? So and I think it's really compelling, and these are these are things that I've heard before, and I've found very compelling. Let me ask you, Ollie. So with regards to the Jews' small population, would you agree that would you agree or disagree that there's many times in history and even now when small populations can persist for many reasons without divine intervention? Like, for example, I could list, if you want, the different ethnic groups that have maintained small populations over centuries. Would you want me to list those, or is that compelling to you or not?
No, I'd agree with that. I would agree with that.
Okay. Okay, great. So that's the first thing. And I think what you're going to say is, look, one can be true, the other can be true, but to have all seven be true is pretty remarkable. And therefore, so now if I get to the seventh one and each one you say you agree, then we have a problem, right? Because then you're saying, but let's move on. So you agree with the first one, no worries. I'm not going to hold you. Okay, so the second point about worldwide exile, and I've heard this argument a lot. Now the concept of exile wasn't like it's a known historical consequence of conquest in ancient times. So there's dozens and dozens, and I can list all of them if you want, many other people that have been exiled or dispersed. And you know that when other people get dispersed, it doesn't necessarily imply divine foresight. It could simply reflect common knowledge of the period. Do you disagree or do you agree with that?
Agree.
You agree. Okay. So I'm getting a little confused now. So intense persecution, anti-Semitism is definitely persistent. It's definitely unique. But but we can understand anti-Semitism through historical, social, and psychological factors. The longevity of anti-Semitism.
To an extent, I think anti-Semitism is really hard to understand without.
So the history of the Jews is a remarkable history. We, as the Jews, have been a distinct minority with distinct customs and beliefs. And we've been historically scapegoated, especially during times of societal stress. So I understand the anti-Semitism that my ancestors have faced through the lens of history and how people in societies are blamed for problems. Did you agree or disagree with that? Maybe you disagree, sounds like.
Well, let me just step back for a second and just say generally about these points. There's no question that other peoples have been exiled from their lands, right?
Okay.
There's no question that there'll be people who are small, that are, let's say, small tribes that have survived until now. Of course. And also, I could explain to you how it is, just by studying history, how it is that the Jews have managed to, let's say, make the, it took serious agricultural work to make the land flourish again, right? I can explain how all these things happened. The point is that when you put these things together, exactly as you said, it builds a picture of something incredibly improbable. Where I would invite you to give me another example of a people where you put these things together, even just a few of them together, where you find this same story, this remarkable, unparalleled, miraculous story of a people who, as I say, had odds totally stacked against them, but not just like, oh, they had a difficult circumstance, almost seemed like they were targeted for having the odds stacked against them.
It's amazing. What I'm saying is explain, like, we don't have to find religious explanations. Like, it is amazing. Like, I believe that the Jews have an amazing history. But I think a lot of things are amazing. I think Michael Jordan is an incredible basketball player. I think his skills are just out of this world. But I don't have to invoke God to understand Michael Jordan. Just because he's an anomaly doesn't mean God. Just because the Jews are an anomaly, and there's lots of anomalies in this world. Chinese civilization is an anomaly in different ways, the way they've flourished and had success. There's many incredible things about this incredible world we live in, and there's incredible explanations for how all these incredible things happen. And if we just say, well, it's so amazing. I mean, how could Einstein be Jewish and Freud is Jewish and also the Torah, these things, like you're bringing up these amazing points, that have answers, and I've given answers to them, and you've agreed with my answers. You said, yes, I agree. So I don't understand where religion comes in.
I was saying at the end of my explanation that if all these things occurred without them being foretold thousands of years ago, I would have the exact same conclusion as you, that I would say it's amazing, period. And that's the end of the conversation. The point for me, where this moves into divine territory, is that these things were explicitly foretold. I also wanted to add that, we were saying before that each thing individually you can find comparisons to. One of those things that there are actually a couple of things that I think it's harder to find comparisons to. I don't know of any other nation that had their land, language, and culture taken away from them for thousands of years, and then they return and reestablish sovereignty. But also,
there's also uniqueness to the Norwegian. But there's a fallacy here, though. Like you're saying, and there's also no one like, I don't know your last name, but there's no one like Ollie in the world, right? Like you are a unique human being. For me to say, like, you are literally 1 in 7 billion. Like there's no one in this world with your DNA. Like the odds that I'm talking to you right now out of anyone else in the world is 1 in 7 billion. What are the odds? It must be God, right? Like that's a fallacious argument. Like just because nobody has the histories that the Jews have doesn't mean that God is the reason. Like, you know who else has a remarkable history are the Norwegians. Nobody has a history like the Norwegians, right? I could also point to the incredible things they've done. It'll be very different from Jewish history, but just because something is unique, Occam's razor would say you look for the easiest explanation. And I know I'm cutting in, but I also know we have 4 minutes. I do want to get your response to something. So there's general predictions in religious texts that contain broad and general predictions that can be interpreted in many ways, like and you'll say, no, these are specific. There's I hope this doesn't get you mad, but there's the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So like, it's not a coincidence that like, of course, like Israel matters to Jews, right? Like it's not random that we closed our eyes and said, where should we, we spun the globe and say, we're going to go wherever our finger lands. Like, no, we want to go to Israel because it's in the Torah. Like we want to go. The reason we wanted to go to Israel is because it's in the Torah. Do you see what I'm saying? If we had closed our eyes, spun the globe, and then put our finger somewhere, and it was Israel, that would have been remarkable. But we wanted to go there. So it's not like, you see what I'm saying? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that respect. I don't want to use that term in like a pejorative way. Yeah.
I think there's a fallacy in that argument, which is that, yes, of course, we're going to look at those prophecies, right? That say there'll be a return to the land and there'll be persecution, all these things. But the fallacy is thinking that we are entirely in control of these things, right? So, for example, we're certainly not in control. We can desperately wish to survive and have whilst other religions and cultures and nations and empires have risen and fallen. The ancient Romans desperately wanted to survive, and they weren't able to. So many of those 7 things I listed, we could desperately want. We wanted to return to the land for thousands of years, and we weren't able to. Now, yes, of course, it happened in the end. But my point is that so many of these 7 things, it's the fallacy in thinking is that just because you could deeply will one of those things to happen, or all of those things to happen, they're going to happen. 2 things that I would also pick you up on is... number one, I actually do think that Jewish history has an edge over most other nations and empires because of those.
Sure, but what's the threshold? If it's this amazing, it's by God. If it's this amazing, I just like, at what threshold do we say, wow, that's just too incredible? Like,
for example, one of those things I listed that we see fewer number maybe with other nations and things like that. But I do think anti-Semitism is particularly unique that you couldn't really explain through natural means. I'm happy to elaborate.
I said that to Alain Pépé. I said that to Alain Pépé when I spoke to him, who's probably one of the most prominent historians on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And his response to me was, I think he was that I was wrong in saying that there have been, and I don't know the history, but I think there's been a lot of other. It would be I want to be a righteous, moral person. I don't want to be callous or kind of ignorant to the suffering of other people. There's been a lot of other people that have been discriminated against. I don't know that there's a threshold. And I say, well, if you hate us this much, it's racism. And if you hate us this much, it's divine racism. It just seems kind of like an arbitrary line to me. I mean, there's lots of hate. By the way, this is an amazing world we live in, and we're never going to understand the mysteries of the universe. And the second that we say, "Oh, well, it's probably God," is the second that we kind of stop trying to look for answers. This is an explanation used for how life can get started. Is well, it must be God, and it's not. We're never going to know everything about the universe, but to just throw in the white flag and said, "Well, anything that's this amazing or this spectacular, it must be God." That's not the scientific process. Like the way that you, Ollie, discern truth in your day-to-day life and why you know the sky is blue is not because of the Torah. It's because you believe in what the scientists are telling you. We have a rigorous process for discerning and ascertaining historical reality. And that's why you don't believe that Jesus was resurrected, right? Because there's not enough evidence for it. Because we have a scientific process through which we ascertain historical truth. And that process hasn't said that there was a revelation at Sinai. Otherwise, a secular high school around the corner from you would be teaching that God revealed himself at Sinai, right?
No.
No?
There are plenty of things that are true that aren't taught in school.
Yeah.
I use a process of logical deduction in everything I believe and consider to be the case, including my analysis of anti-Semitism. And I don't think that saying there's God, well, I'm saying there's a deeper supernatural force that I believe is
why?
It has
Why
to be
can't it just
driving
be that people are
anti-Semitism.
Why can't it just be that people are hateful?
People are hateful, and they seem to hate all different peoples, and the Catholics hate the Protestants, and the English hate the French, and vice versa. There's something about anti-Semitism. It's the elements of it that I listed, particularly its annihilationist element. That
you're giving arbitrary.
I don't believe.
What's your threshold for thinking that something is divine? Like, I guess that's my question. Is like, to me, these distinctions seem somewhat arbitrary as far as they lead us to believe in God. I hear what you're saying. Like, I'm not denying that anti-Semitism is really crazy. I'm just saying the point at which you say, "Wow, this has become so crazy that it must be God." I don't understand the process that you're getting to that point.
Well, I suppose I would say, maybe we could change the language a bit. I could say there's something deep, there's something subconscious on a very, very deep level that isn't explainable through the excuses given and thrown about.
That's where I disagree. It is explainable. But as I worked through each of the 6 points you made earlier, each of them are explainable. Even the point about the predictions in the Torah, I can explain that if you want. It has to do with general predictions. For example, the prediction of exile could be seen as a natural outcome of the political instability that ancient Israel faced, particularly in a region when frequently invaded by powerful empires. Okay, so that's explained. The self-fulfilling prophecy point, historical retrospection, universal themes of suffering and resilience. Like, so each of these points I can explain, and yet you're saying, "No, Jake, your explanations are not valid." And I'm saying they are valid. They're valid for you. If you were to understand how the story of Jesus were to be resurrected, I could use the identical arguments you're making. I could say, well, how does everyone think he was resurrected? And how do you explain all the predictions in the New Testament, which are also general predictions that are also, I can make the identical arguments, and people do, about all the other religions, to which you would probably...
What kind of...
Yeah.
As I say, first of all, I don't consider the predictions to be, generalized. I think you can explain, as I say, with the exception of anti-Semitism, and I'll go back to that in a second if you'll permit me. I think a lot of the things, you can explain how they've happened. For me, the clincher is the fact that they are foretold. Now, you would say they're generalized. I would say I don't think they're generalized at all. I think they're specific. I think they're unprecedented. I think saying you'll be few in number, scattered all over the world, you'll be a light to the nations, you'll transform the world's values, all the nations of the earth will bless themselves through you, that Abraham would become the most influential person in human history, the fact that the land would be desolate. It said the land will be desolate when your enemies dwell there, and when you're exiled. For me, these things are very, very specific and unique to the Jewish people and unprecedented. But particularly with regard to anti-Semitism, the thing about anti-Semitism for me, that you say, well, we can just explain it through natural means. I think what I'm getting at is it's like, it seems to be something that's bothering the anti-Semites that I don't think you can really necessarily apply to what we see with other hatreds, or at least the rationalizations they provide us with. So, for example, this idea of, well, it's hatred of the other. right? And that's what anti-Semitism is about. Well, Jews were utterly assimilated into Germany and Europe in the 19th and 20th century. And you had suddenly them saying, stop trying to, you're becoming too German, stop trying to become like us. Jews are hated. They say, then another theory is because of the economic reasons, because they're more powerful and seen as economically stronger. But then Jews were dirt poor in Russia, and they were hated, and you had the pogroms and all that. So what I'm saying is that theories are often provided to explain, and I find science can be understandable reasons, perhaps, or just utilizing other people's or all that. But when it comes to the Jews, there's not even like we're going to hate you and create a stereotype that we're going to perpetuate, and then we're going to utilize you and for our own good or enslave you, whatever, or just blame everything on you. We're actually going to annihilate you. It's this annihilationist kind of hatred where Hitler was prepared to literally make his own war effort suffer as a result of wiping out the Jews. And so the point is more that there seems to be something so deeply subconscious, that's like driving the darkest forces of humanity in every single generation to be so obsessed with destroying the Jews. And today we're seeing it with Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, that to me, this points to something far deeper than a simple dislike of the unlike kind of explanation of hatred that we may see in other sociological settings. So it doesn't necessarily mean I suddenly go, oh, God, therefore God. But, you know, I use other arguments, and as I was stating throughout this, to get to that point. But because I know all of that, I find the fact that the Jewish people, I do believe, have a divine mission in this world, and the fact that the forces of evil in every single generation seem to have a big problem with the Jews, to me that points to something far deeper in the world's kind of supernatural destiny that is going on here. I find it's just very hard to explain, I find, through natural means. You can disagree with me on that, which is fair enough, but I think, and many historians do as well, they think there's something deeper than simply a typical dislike that we see among other cultures.
It's definitely bizarre. It's definitely bizarre. I mean, people like to scapegoat, and the Jews have been a great group to scapegoat. I do want to say something. I don't know how relevant this is, and I did tell you that we wouldn't talk about Israel, Palestine. So I want to hold to that promise. But this is something I believe very strongly, which is that as a Jew, I would hope you would agree with me. It's very important to not be callous to someone suffering out of fear of anti-Semitism. I think that would be a really disgusting, ironic immorality. Is if someone is legitimately suffering, and we think that their plight is not real and is just a guise for anti-Semitism. Like, I think it's important for me and other Jews to be wary of anti-Semitism, but never to, if, like, for example, please, I said we wouldn't get into this, so I'll use it as an analogy. You know, if Israel actually harms a people, and then some people say, Israel harmed us, I'm now really desperate and really in pain. And if we were to say to that person, oh, you're being anti-Semitic because Israel had the right to do what they're doing, we're now being callous to that person's pain. And I think that would be really unfortunate if anyone were to do that. Like, so that's my, I think anti-Semitism is very real and very dangerous. I don't know if this is what you were saying at all. Whether we're talking about, we don't have to talk about Israel, Palestine, but anyway, that's just one thought I have, is that I don't want the fear of anti-Semitism to lead us to being callous to other people's suffering. That's all. Do you agree?
Completely. Yeah, I do. I do agree with that.
Okay. All right. So
yeah, I
back to your
agree.
point. I promise we wouldn't get into the conflict. So I don't mean to take us there.
It's fine. It's fine. I think, we can do. As I said, a little short on time now, so we can potentially have a further discussion on this. But
okay.
as I say, I just felt there are plenty other voices who are way more qualified as
Yeah,
well that can really
I
get
agree
into this.
with you.
But from my perspective, um, it's interesting. You know, there we're told that when the Egyptians were drowning in the sea, and the Jewish people were saved and brought to the other side. You know, that's in the Torah's narrative of the Exodus. The Midrash, the rabbinic commentary, tells us that the angels were singing in heaven to God his praises at redeeming the Jewish people, and you know, punishing the people who had basically tried to commit in slavery and genocide. And God said, "Don't sing right now."
You
You
know
know,
why I
my
hate this
creatures are
story? You know why I hate this story is because I was talking to someone. I'm not going to name names, but I was talking to
By the way,
a
before just before you
yeah,
continue, I'm not comparing, let's say Arabs who Israel are fighting. Let's say
yeah.
people, innocent
But
people who get caught up in this. I'm
but
not
you won't.
comparing
But
us.
you okay? So I'll give you that. I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. I'm not gonna put words. Fine. You know what? Let me not expand upon this point. But I so I spoke to someone. Not gonna name names. Not even gonna give a time frame. I spoke to someone at some point in the past, and
Yeah,
they had a pretty strong degree of apathy for Palestinians who are dying, and their explanation was exactly the story you told. You know, in the Torah it says this, and it's I think the highest form of immorality to simultaneously be callous towards someone suffering, and then try to brand yourself as actually an empathic person by describing the story. As Judaism teaches, all that matters is what we do. It doesn't matter what we feel or what we believe. What matters is what we do. And if
yeah,
someone is claiming to be righteous and talking about these stories, this is what Judaism stands for. I think as a Jew, it's important to be able to call out when Israel does something wrong, or when your peer does something wrong, and when someone's suffering. And you can care about the Jewish plight and care about other people. You can care about the Jewish plight and condemn Israel. So I'm going on a rant now, so I'm going to stop myself because I know that's not what you were saying, but I don't care about
yeah.
biblical
It's not
stories.
what I was
And
saying. Look, you're talking to me as someone who does care about biblical stories, and a lot of my morality is
no,
centered
I
around
care.
that.
I don't
The
care about
reason
the
why,
biblical stories as a means to undermine reality, like the present day reality. To say, listen, I am a
sure,
good person. Let me read you the Bible. It's like, give me a break. Judaism should be about the here and now and how we treat people now and here in this world, right?
sure. So when I
Oh.
when of course, of course. So when I bring up this point, and I brought it up today when I was talking in a school, the reason I bring it up is to say, if God cries over the suffering of the Egyptians, right, who were bad people, right, how much more so is he in pain when someone who's an innocent bystander is hurting, when someone who hasn't done something wrong is hurt, right? So the point is of the story is to sensitize Jewish people who perhaps for 2,000 years of exile and persecution became very inward focused, understandably. The point for me of that story is how much we should actually be sensitive to everyone suffering. But here's the point that I also think needs to be made. The concern is, and I think I've heard, because when you mentioned your when you first reached out to me, I checked out an interview we did with one of my rabbis, Manis Friedman, and he was saying that of course, the Jewish people are the ones who first articulated this vision of world peace as an ideal, of the sanctity of human life, and that every life is created in God's image. You didn't see the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans giving that as an idea. I think we as a people detest war. But the interesting thing as well is that, I'm sorry to bring up the biblical story again, but the Jewish people themselves weren't told that they couldn't sing at that moment of redemption and that moment of an end to decades or centuries of so much difficulty and suffering. And so part of the point is that there's different things to juggle, especially when we're at war right now. On the one hand, we want to be sensitive to the fact that we don't want to be seeing any suffering and that it's absolutely horrendous that innocent people, human beings, let's stop defining ourselves by all these different things. Human beings are suffering as a result
Yeah.
of the war. Even, by the way, people, going back to the story of the Egyptians, even people who have made very bad decisions, who are doing evil things, I lament even their suffering. I'd much rather that people would change their ways and would choose peace, right? And I think that's what Judaism calls on us to feel as well. And I feel that, and I'm not I absolutely detest the fact that there has to be any suffering at all, any warfare. But the concern that I think Rabbi Friedman was bringing up, and the fact that the Jews did sing while God didn't, is that we also have to be cautious of not becoming so timid that we're unable to do what we need to do. Perhaps if we had a bit less of that, we'd have been able to move even faster in the war. And that's the concern, because I think part of Israel's mistakes over the past few decades has been to be too timid and unable to make bold decisions, which in the long run would be good for all sides.
I want to make it clear, I'm not referring to any specific rabbis. I want to make that very clear. But when you said, rightfully so.
By the way, Jake, I have to wrap up in a second. By the way,
one final comment. When you said a moment ago that it's terrible that civilians die, that's all I'm asking for. Now, you said we don't want to be too timid in war. That's fine. You can still say exactly what you just said. You can say it's so terrible when civilians die. You said it. Other people should be able to say it. Every person should be able to say it. Right?
Sure. I don't have any hesitation saying it. I never have done.
Okay. Let's end this. Let me end this recording. Thank you so much.